the horror comic that belonged to my older sister that I was sitting underneath one of those hair dryers that fits over your head when I was like really, really small. And my older sister had a bunch of horror comics from like the early 70s. And there was one story in there that I read that really freaked me out because I was just really little.
Yeah.
And it was probably really benign and not that scary at all.
For the time,
but I was
mind-blowing.
little,
Yeah.
and it was a horror comic. So that's the first reading of comics that I remember. Although I know I'd been reading others.
Probably the Peanuts trade paperback, or the Peanuts pocket paperbacks that I had as a kid.
Okay. Was there a particular Peanuts character that spoke to you?
The whole cast, yeah. I just love the way that these kids were really horrible to each other.
First comic that got me to love comics was probably the comics inside Cricket magazine. They did like comics that would explain things and also like little individual comics, and it was pretty awesome.
Probably the same one that a bunch of people my age, the X-Men with the multi-fold cover drawn by Jim Lee.
Yeah.
And it's like Chris Claremont, is that right?
X-Men #1, yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think all the colors on that cover, they resonated in the same way that the early Justice League cartoon with the Superman, essential palette, like that kind of thing. So it had that. It was tapping into even a younger period of time, but as a comic.
Yeah.
Not a show, not something that captures your attention with a lot of bells and whistles, but like a physical object that I came across, and it was just as exciting. It lit my brain up like a pinball machine.
It's totally ridiculous, but there's a Jello Man comic way back in the day. My first comics were not like Marvel DC comics. They were like, Radio Shack had a comic at some point. Kool-Aid had a comic that was literally the Kool-Aid Man. Blowing through walls and fighting a guy made of fire that made everybody thirsty, which arguably Kool-Aid doesn't make people less thirsty. But right, so that's one of those that like just made me realize this is insane. Like we can do whatever we want.
I know it's a totally cliche answer, but I read Sandman in high school, and it showed me that there was more to storytelling, that you could tell stories about deeper things than just, simple kind of good versus evil conflict. Yeah.
X-Men. I mean,
Which one? Or just one in general?
it's
like
it's a thing that's like an island. It's Talking Island.
Okay, yeah.
Krakoa?
Krakoa.
Krakoa. Yeah. Yeah, it was back in the day.
Yeah. No,
And so it was the early stuff. It was the cock and burn stuff.
Okay.
And I was about 12 years old, and I flipped it open for the first time. And I was like, man, I want to do that. And I realized I'm not an artist, but I make a good sandwich.
Detective Comics Annual number 8.
Oh.
I think it was 8. It was the Riddler Origin with Chuck Dixon and Kieran Dwyer.
Oh.
So I was reading comics before then. What was the Dr. Graves book, Steve Ditko?
I don't know.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I loved that one as a kid. But it was that one with Kieran that just made me go, okay, comic books are awesome.
Yeah.
And it was colored by David Mazzucchelli's wife, Richmond, what is her name? Lewis?
I don't know.
Anyway.
Yeah, you're throwing me for a loop on all this.
I know.
That was an issue of West Coast Avengers that had the red onesie Hank Pym getting sucked into a sand whirlpool in it from the 1980s.
What about that issue was, what about it blew your mind?
It was mostly the number of pockets he could fit in the red onesie, and it was actually the worst costume he's ever had. In the same issue, that there was also white costume vision, so a large part of my sexual awakening came from that issue.
It was in a Crisis on Infinite Earth 7.
Why 7?
Because my mom got me a grab bag of comics from the store, from the Circle K, and that was one of the comics in there. And that was the first cover that I was like, whoa! And that was Superman holding the dead Supergirl, and I still have that comic. So that I didn't read it, I didn't understand any of that DC shit when I was that young, but the cover got me. So yeah, that's responsible for hooking me. My mom hooked me as a kid, is what I'm trying to say.
That's how
it goes.
How about you, Kurt?
Brian Bendis and Alex Maleev's Daredevil was probably the first comic I got super into. I just fucking loved it.
I think it was, I can't remember the number. It was a Spider-Man from when I was a kid. It had Hobgoblin, is the really close-up face of Hobgoblin, and I got it from
tearing it apart?
No, just like him, just like a close on his face. He's saying something. There's a word balloon coming out, and I got it when I was like 6 or 7, somewhere around there. And that's like I had a few comics prior to that, but that was like the comic that just like clicked with me, and I still have it. I just can't remember what the number is, but yeah, that's the comic that made me like really, really just like yes, this is it. I love this, So yeah, that's Spider-Man.
Oh, I think it's Amazing Spider-Man 237. I think it's got it's Spider-Man fighting the Juggernaut, and I used to make my mom read it to me constantly. And there's a page in there where Spider-Man runs a semi-truck into the Juggernaut and explodes. Coolest thing I'd ever seen. Yeah, I was 5.
Tales of G.I. Joe #4. My grandma got it for me when I was sick, and it was like the best thing ever. And then the comic that changed my life was New Mutants Demon Bear Saga.
Oh, that's a good one.
I love comics before that, but that book...
It was The Avengers. I think it was number 274, which was the death of Hercules. And really? It was, the first time I'd ever seen someone die in a comic, and now we're all jaded and we know that he's going to come back in 6 months or whatever, but when I was a kid, this was real shit. Like, when I was 8 years old, it was like The Wire or, Breaking Bad or whatever. This is awesome. And also, John Buscema art, he was my guy from How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. So, following a monthly book with him drawing it, that was it.
Brave and the Bold issue with him and the Metal Men, Batman and the Metal Men. I remember it from when I was 5 years old, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. I didn't even know comics existed. I knew Batman existed because I watched him on TV, and then I saw that, and I was like, this is the craziest thing I ever saw, and I loved it.
It was a book by Jules Pfeiffer called The Great Comic Book Heroes, and it had it was an essay, and then it had like Batman's origin and Superman's origin and Captain America's origin, a lot of these old great Golden Age comics. So I sort of started the when comics did.
I think the last issue of Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, that it's still an emotional experience for me every time I read that. So and I even have a oh no wait, wrong arm. I have my Doom Patrol tattoo. So that's the one that got me.
Batman number 425.
What happens in that issue?
Batman throws a car battery at a guy.
Awesome.
No, it is awesome. It's great. And the sound effect is ka-tunk. He wrecks that dude. He wrecks him bad.
The book that cemented it for me was the Death of Superman story arc. I was kind of loosely in and out of comics before then and there, but Death of Superman really got it. Before that, I was into John Byrne Superman, and I was kind of just reading Superman stuff, but I branched out at Death.
Punisher, Escape from Prison.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
I'd never experienced anything like it. I was really young. It was so dark and gritty. I got hooked from then on.
First comic that got me to love comics was The Authority, issue 14, the Mark Millar, or Miller, however you want to argue his name, and Frank Quitely issue, or Quitely, but I'll say Quietly to the day I die. I loved it because Frank Quitely's a beast, and he drew awesome, and he drew real. He drew cartoony, he drew out of his head, but it was all honest, super intricate. Super fluid and mashed potato, rubbery, and that's the reason why I started drawing, the reason that made me love comics. That was it. That was the one.
X-Men Annual number 9, which was drawn by Art Adams. It was when the X-Men go to Asgard. As a kid who didn't read the New Mutants or the X-Men or anything yet, I really couldn't understand what was going on in the book, because especially with Warlock, when he showed up and he just transformed, I didn't know what was going to happen. But the art and even the characters that I wasn't even fully familiar with yet just pulled me into it. And I had just started drawing, and that's when I knew this is what I wanted to do, and I was obsessed with it.
Calvin and Hobbes, of course.
That is a great answer. That is my answer, too. That's the one that got...
Well, that's during different times. I mean, Karl Barks, the Ducks books, but then I got out of comics for a while, and Love and Rockets brought me back, and Matt Wagner's Mage brought me back, so... there's no one book. It's just the
different answers
overall,
for different times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, when I grew up, my grandmother kept my father and his brother's old comics. So when I was a kid, I would go to my grandmother's house and dig out Stan Lee's Spider-Man, and there was they were ready covered. They were all about the experience of reading an old comic, and it was. There was one where Silver Surfer fought Human Torch, and I think it was Silver Surfer in the first 10 or 11 that was so cool. And there was Hulk versus Thing, Fantastic Four. There was there was here's the thing. We wrote a Wolverine comic, right?
Right, that's season 1.
And so in doing signings, in order to get people to come to the signings for our Wolverine, we invited our pal Len Wein, who invented the character. And people brought him comics that he'd written over the years to get signed. And a handful of those comics were comics I remember buying at the 7-Eleven, as a little kid, going, oh man, you did that Green Lantern with the tattooed man? That was big for me. And finding out that, the guy that did the comics, that it was before I knew that guys did comics. And so that was a hell of a thing. So yeah, that Green Lantern with the tattooed guy, and those old Stan Lee Spider-Mans and Fantastic Fours and Silver Surfers and Submariner fucking Orca. That was a cool one. I don't know, that the Stan Lee of it all. I was thinking about this recently. What old comics can do is take you to the time in which they were written. The slang in them, the concerns in them, feel transportive, I think is the word. And I think that rubbed off on us because Black Rhino had Marvel Tales and that. And so as we're putting together the show we want to see in the world, having an element of throwback to other times was definitely part of it. And I feel like it's due to coming up on old comics.